I'm Will, and this is a Cardboard Minute. Have you ever played a broken game? Now, I'm not talking about physically broken. I'm talking about the mechanics being broken, maybe unforeseen by the designers. Now, I'm not necessarily talking about these ones here. Not necessarily, I'll get to that. But have you ever played a game where maybe you uncovered a combo that was not necessarily intended by the designers, but still within the space of the rules, that just totally carried away and swamped the competition? Now, I just had experience playing with this the other night with Whistle Mountain. Now, Whistle Mountain was a lot of fun. It had some very unique mechanics with the way you're building up the infrastructure and creating machines and then landing your airships. But I stumbled across a combo fairly early in the game where I had a starting power that let me double the activation of all machines that my balloon landed on. And then I picked up an upgrade that let me recall my balloon immediately after placing it, so I could then send it out again next turn. And it may not seem like much, but especially if you have one or two machines next to each other and you're activating them both twice and collecting resources, I easily outpaced my opponents by over 100 points by the end of the game. And it just wasn't fun for them. And it came to the point where I just pushed the game to a close because I had won by so much that there was no longer any competition. And it was just such a simple combo, but you have to wonder about why such things exist and what other combos are there. If you know of any crazy broken combos, especially accidentally, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear about them. And now I'm talking about combos that were not intentional. You know, there are games like Innovation from Carl Chidik, same creator of Impulse and Glory to Rome. His games, certainly these ones by design, are meant to have broken combos, and it is almost a race to find them and exploit them as quickly as possible. That's almost the point of the game, is to have these ridiculous combos, the game explodes to an ending, and you've had fun. Then there are games similar to that, like Arcana, where maybe the combos are not broken, but you are tasked with finding the combos and milking them as hard as you can until you win. A lot of engine builders are like that as well, and they could be a very fun system for gaming. And I very much enjoy Arcana and even the crazier games like Impulse or Innovation. But these are intentional. Impulse or Innovation was designed specifically to be like that. Unlike, unfortunately, in Whistle Mountain, which I still love the game, I would probably try to prevent a combo like that happening again because it was just so outlandish, but still within the boundary of the rules, that it was broken. And I know developers work very hard, designers work very hard to iron out the kinks of the game, to play test them, but sometimes these things don't come to light until after release. For example, Scythe. Scythe is a game I absolutely love, but not long after release, they released I believe it's the Rusviet Industrial board combinations, where if you are assigned both of those boards, it leads to an unfair advantage where you have a streamlined path to victory. And they announced, I guess, after the fact, after it has been released to the community and the game has achieved thousands of plays, they've discovered this. And you have to question sometimes how much place testing goes into a game. Now, sometimes it can be overlooked. There's no way to play test absolutely everything. And I'm sure Scythe had an absolute ton of play testing, and it is a very finely tuned game, which again, I love very much. But sometimes these things happen. Even some of the biggest board game companies in the world, like Wizards of the Coast, for example, are constantly banning new Magic the Gathering cards because they player found some unforeseen combination that just destroyed the game and made it so that that was the only path to victory if you wanted to compete. And so they trim the excess and pare it down and sand off the rough edges and make it work. And sometimes like that's a great thing. Sometimes the community is less impressed, especially if maybe someone has spent a lot of money acquiring the cards required to achieve those combos. Or in the example of Tapestry, another game from Stonemaier Games that I really enjoy. Now, after it was released, even though they did tons of playtesting, they allowed the community to log their plays in an online format so that Stonemaier Games could track the gameplay data. And using that, they ended up essentially releasing like a patch, a way to balance the various factions of the game or the cards of the game after the release. And a lot of the board game community cried foul. They cried that was unfair, that their copies of the game are now broken. I still like mine a lot and play it a fair amount, especially solo. It doesn't bother me solo because I'm not competing against other players. But they did release errata to change the game. And while that, is fine, and Stonemaier took it full advantage of the extra data that they had, many people in the community were still not happy about the fact that their board game now needed an update or a fix in their eyes to be playable. And even with the expansion that got released, the Plans and Employees, I believe it's called, did not include reprinted versions of those new cards, which I think was a big misstep on their part, especially if they publicly announced that, hey, sorry, we made a mistake. These factions should have been a little bit different. They probably should have at least included new versions, maybe even at cost, in the expansion. I'm sure when they do reprints, many board games see reprints where they fix errors. They fix cards that were maybe overpowered or out of balance. And that's just part of life. Things happen. They release updates. And it is, in some ways, nice to see that a game is not completely abandoned once it's released. A parallel can be drawn with the video game world. Sometimes you can buy a new game from the store that just released on a physical disc or cartridge, plug it into your device, your Switch, your PS5, or whatever, and there's already a downloadable patch to fix things that, they rushed the game out the door and there was tons of errors. We see this in some pretty major video game publishers too. There's something to be said for games that had enough development put in ahead of time to smooth out all those edges and bugs. But as the scale and scope of games and publishing, video games or board games, increases and deadlines increase, and the costs of production increase, and more people are involved in terms of like graphics and visual designs and publishing and printing and shipping, there are deadlines, and there may come a point where, art is never completed, art is abandoned. And in some cases, that could be totally fine. I am still very much enjoying my copy of Tapestry. Scythe is easy enough just to avoid those two combinations, and nobody has an unfair advantage, and move on with your day. But I can definitely see that some people might, and even myself sometimes, might feel like a game is incomplete or broken or unfinished. Because something is missing. That something like it eats away at my heart if I open up a new board game and it's missing a component and I have to contact the publisher for replacement. It's happened several times before. And generally, the publishers are very receptive at fixing and replacing those, with a couple of exceptions. But there's just something that makes you feel bad about your purchase, and you don't want that. Now, I've got Quodd Heroes up here, which is a very fun, very video game-like board game designed by a friend of mine, Brian Eiler. I helped him playtest this here in Ottawa, and during playtests, there are a couple times where I found some broken combo in the cards or the abilities at the time. There was one case where I found some crazy multiplier combo that allowed me to move most of the way across the board, pushing everyone off the edges and collecting crystals as we went. And that had to be fixed. He had to tweak those cards or remove them and sand down the edges until the game was a finished product. But there comes a point where, like things like Impulse, or even Quodd Heroes, you don't want to remove so much fun of the insanity and the silliness and the big moves and the big turns that the game is not fun anymore. Quodd Heroes maintained many of the fun big moments in the game that made it fun and exciting. Especially for players to pull off cool combos and moves. You want to be able to sit back and say, like, that was awesome. I did a cool move. That was a great, big turn. Whereas Arcana, I found this path through my 8 cards and found this amazing engine that I've built using the minimal amount of cards that I had available to me. And that feels good, as long as you believe that the game is essentially balanced and fair. Or in the case of Impulse, maybe it's not balanced, but that's fine because it's a short game. Once you find your broken combo, or someone else beats you to a different combo, because there are plenty of paths to victory, the game is done and you had a fun time playing it. Going back to Whistle Mountain, the game ended up dragging on to nearly 3 hours, and it just felt unfun anymore. Not to say it's a bad game. I thought there was lots of big turns, lots of fun things to do when you're building up and the water is rising and workers are falling in the water and you're rescuing them and you're building new things and scoring points. I still had a ton of fun with it. So keep that in mind when you play a game that they essentially are works of art in the sense. They are pushed to release dates and published and maybe not ever completely finished, but perhaps there's a new expansion coming out. Perhaps there's an update, or maybe some helpful users on Board Game Geek have came up with a errata or variants that could make it more fun. But I have to say also at the same time, developers, board game designers, publishers, if they're doing their job right, you won't even notice that. The game will still be fun, will be playable, will be smooth, and you won't see broken combos. So, let me know if there's any broken combos you found in board games, anything that you were able to milk to a ridiculous win or loss because the game mechanics just worked that way. But outside of what was intended, I do feel like a broken combo is something that was not intended as part of the game, but you found something that was missed within the rules or within the play that you were able to leverage to a ridiculous extent. Let me know in the comments. I love to hear about it. And thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe. This has been Will with Cardboard Minute. Have a great week.